Hello and welcome to Steve and Dave's Rock Art. Steve, you want to tell the folks a little bit about what this series is about?
Yeah, what the album cover was once an essential part of the record buying experience. Artists would pay a lot of attention to the album cover, as would consumers. And for many of us back in the day, the album cover was really, as important in some ways, almost as important as the music. And album covers, of course, became defining, iconic kinds of things. And while the album cover has, that era has largely passed, what we do in this series is to celebrate um, those who made incredible covers and the covers themselves. And what we'd like to do today is to think a little bit more about Hipgnosis.
Right. We started this series off talking about Hipgnosis because Hipgnosis is arguably the most influential and iconic of all the artists who have designed album covers. And this is our third episode in this original series talking about Hipgnosis. To start off, we talked about the symbiotic relationship between Hipgnosis and Pink Floyd.
Right.
They started at the same time, 67, 68, and Hipgnosis designed their second album cover and every album cover after that.
That's right.
Up until the 80s.
Yeah.
So beyond that, there were other artists that worked with Hipgnosis either exclusively or at least very extensively.
That's right.
And we talked about some of them: Peter Gabriel, Genesis, Paul McCartney,
Yes.
and 10cc, and so on. And this time we're going to be taking a look at the one shots, the artists that had Hipgnosis design one of their covers. And a lot of these were one shots because they were debut albums. And maybe we can start off talking a little bit about who Hipgnosis was, give some background about that for the people that have not had a chance to watch the first two episodes yet. Steve, you want to say a couple words about that?
Well, yeah, Hipgnosis primarily involved the collaboration of Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell. And while other people would join their artistic collective, Thorgerson and Powell were the primary movers. Hipgnosis was it started very modestly in London. What's really fascinating about Hipgnosis, of course, are the relationships that it had with the artists. In the 60s and early 70s, but particularly the late 60s, and in London, the world was a small place. And so those involved in Hipgnosis knew quite well people in very popular bands. And so there was a kind of back and forth there that was it was very productive. But one of the things I think we'd like to emphasize here is that in the earliest of days, when the Hipgnosis was just starting out, it was a very kind of informal setup. And the relationships it had with artists were really very much personal relationships, as opposed to kind of a strictly kind of business connection. And Dave, I guess maybe you want to just briefly give us some insight into Storm Thorgerson and his connection with those in Pink Floyd, for example.
Oh, well, Storm apparently was true to his name. He was kind of a wild figure,
Yes.
somebody who was not afraid of controversy and of just fighting it out in terms of his ideas. And
that's right.
things like good. We talked a little bit about this in the first episode, but the members of Pink Floyd and the members of Hipgnosis had relationships going back to their youth.
Yeah.
Went to the same school, played on the same rugby team, things like that. And so it was kind of a natural thing for Pink Floyd to come to them when they were looking for an album cover for their second
That's right.
album, A Saucer Full of Secrets.
I think it's fair to say that Hipgnosis's fame grew as the popularity of Pink Floyd grew. And it became the case that Hipgnosis emerged as sort of the go-to place for inventive album covers. And they became, I think it's accurate, they became a kind of brand. Hipgnosis became a kind of brand. It was the kind of thing that if you saw an album cover that was very exotic and really caught your eye, you'd look on the back, you'd see who created it. And oftentimes it was Hipgnosis. And artists recognized this. And they wanted a piece of this. They wanted to, if nothing else, to experiment with Hipgnosis and see what Hipgnosis could deliver for them.
Right, and Hipgnosis had a kind of eclectic style. I mean,
yes,
they made very different types of album covers throughout their career.
For sure.
There are certain things that you can follow, certain style elements that they used again and again. A certain love for wordplay and pun connects a lot of their stuff. But on a whole, what connected them was that they made interesting covers. So if you see a cover that you say, wow, that's kind of neat, it was a pretty good bet that it was a Hipgnosis cover.
That's right. I think that's right. So maybe this is the time, Dave, we start to look at some of these covers, these so-called one-offs. Some of these groups that we'll look at were established, and they just wanted, they wanted to give this Hipgnosis group a try to see what they could do for their career in a way. But some of these artists will be maybe a little less familiar to those watching today. But where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that a number of these artists are virtually unknown anymore. But let's go ahead and go chronologically, which would place us in 1970 for our one-offs. And the first cover we're going to look at is from Picnic, A Breath of Fresh Air. Now, when I say from Picnic, it sounds like it's a group called Picnic. That's not the case. In fact, Picnic was a sampling of a number of different groups from Harvest Records. So Harvest Records put out this sampling to give people a chance to see what their artists had to offer, what sort of artists were maybe interesting for the people listening, so that could go out and buy albums from those artists and so on.
Right.
It occurs to me that that's a form of marketing that we don't really see anymore.
I think that's right. I mean, in this era, when a lot of the artists were starting out, as record companies were starting out, the notion of the kind of compilation album, a kind of sampler, I think was quite common. And in fact, if you look back to this era, 60s and early 70s, you'll find a lot of these albums out there. They just don't really exist anymore. But this was one of them. And I guess that's one of the things that makes this even a bit more exotic, is that this was an album. This was a record company reaching out to Hipgnosis, and what can you do for us? How can you help make our brand more recognizable? And they come up with a pretty distinctive cover. I think this is it's an odd one.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that Hipgnosis did did covers for a number of these bands as well, and that was probably the connection. I think by the time that this came out, they had already done the Quartermass album. Quartermass is one of the groups on the album, as well as groups like Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, Barclay James Harvest.
Yep.
So there are names that we recognize even today. But just taking a look at the cover itself for a second, we see a family on the beach having a picnic. There's their picnic blanket, and they're all enjoying a nice day on the beach. Strangely, they're all wearing gas masks.
That's right.
Which makes the idea of a breath of fresh air somewhat ironic. This was actually taken at Dungeness in southeast England, and not far from this expanse of beach, there's a giant nuclear power plant. And Aubrey Powell said, it's a really eerie atmosphere. You have this wonderful stretch of pristine beach, and nobody's there. It's like deserted. And he said, quote, it was an exceptionally strange atmosphere, end quote, or quote, downright spooky, end quote.
Yeah.
So you have this deserted beach, and that eeriness is kind of the subtext for this entire picture, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's also, of course, the era of growing awareness in the environmental movement. There's also in this era a belief that in fact the world there's almost a kind of apocalyptic kind of trajectory for the world in terms of what's happening environmentally, and so that sort of adds to this as well. It's a peculiar cover, and if you think about it, if you're a record company and you're wanting to get attention, well, maybe this is the way to do it. This is I think for what Harvest Records was looking for, this had to really fit for them.
Yes, and it's definitely an eye catcher. It's ironic. In fact, this album cover was a gatefold, and on the other side of it, like 10 feet from this family, lying in the sand, a dead bird, which
right.
is also kind of an iconic symbol for the environment.
For sure. Right? That's right.
Okay. The next one that we're going to look at is from the group Trees on the Shore. Now, they were thinking about, okay, how do we treat this in an album cover? On the shore, trees, what do we think of there? And part of that discussion was a friend of theirs, John Blake, a conceptual artist from the Royal College of Art. And he said, how about a girl throwing a glass of water? And Powell said, quote, it struck an immediate chord as an extension of our own preoccupation with random control in throwing liquids, end quote. So now we know that Hipgnosis had a preoccupation with random control and throwing liquids.
Yes.
Strange. So they heard that, and where that came from, who knows? But they said, yes, it's perfect. And this was the photograph, black and white photograph, right? And then hand tinted.
Hand tinted, yeah.
Kind of a Victorian look here. A compelling picture, I think.
I think so too. There's a hint of kind of malice there as well, which I think is intentional. It is, but the throwing liquids idea, if you think about this, and if you're familiar with what Hipgnosis's work was all, it happens over and over again. I mean, it becomes a kind of trope. It's fascinating how these things all sorts of start to fit together. But the use of photography and then tinting it would also become something that Hipgnosis would do and use over and over again. I think it really did something.
They really love that, yeah.
They did, yeah. It achieved something quite interesting.
By the way, the model here is Katie Meehan, daughter of Tony Meehan from The Shadows, Cliff Richard's old backing band.
Yeah.
So there's that. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is music from Free Creek from 1973.
Oh, yeah.
And Free Creek wasn't an artist, but it was a series of super sessions that was actually recorded in 1968 from June to August. And each of these sessions was headed up by a musical celebrity. Jeff Beck did one of the sessions. Eric Clapton did one. Keith Emerson headed one of the sessions. We had Mitch Mitchell, the drummer from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and Linda Ronstadt. And really, the continuity, I guess, was they used more or less the same session players, but that was about the only crossover. The album
Yeah.
cover itself, kind of the Prometheus bound theme. If Prometheus is a male model and the binding are really loose chains.
Mhm. Yeah. This really, you know, the concept of the album, the way that they built this album, you know, these super sessions, and even the cover, that just really speaks to a different era, right? A kind of more freewheeling, less, maybe a little less commercial era. And the fact that this album cover is so exotic in this regard, I mean, it just speaks to a kind of freedom in the industry that would soon fade away. But Hipgnosis was all in on this kind of thing. It's fascinating.
That model kind of has a Robert Plant thing going on, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the
And Led Zeppelin was one of the groups that
for sure.
used Hipgnosis quite a lot.
That's right.
So, moving right along, the next cover is from the Sharks. Jab It in Your Eye.
Jab It in Your Eye. Yeah. No, this is again. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, Storm Thorgerson is the one who came up with the idea. This is disorienting. It's somewhat disturbing, and that comes from the fact that the open eyes are painted on the eyelids of the two. And now this is something that we'll talk about as we go along. But record companies always just wanted to have a portrait of the singer or portrait of the band, the artist on the cover. That was the standard going back to the beginning of time, right?
Sure.
And a lot of what Hipgnosis did was to take this idea of the portrait and to try to subvert it in some way, give it some sort of little interesting twist, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And the interesting twist here clearly is the painted eyelids.
Yeah, it's yeah. The challenging of this approach is, I think, sort of classic Hipgnosis. You know, clearly the album cover was always about promotion, and it was about the identification of artist and song, and the fact that you'd sort of kind of tweak that, poke at that, you know, the kind of bad boy thing that Hipgnosis was oftentimes, you know, engaged in. You know, it's interesting stuff. The Sharks also then entered this category of relatively unknown bands with compelling album covers. And if you look at the Hipgnosis collection, the couple hundred album covers that they were involved in, so many of the groups just don't ring a bell at all, but they have the distinction of having quite a, you know, an interesting album cover to look back on. And I think the Sharks sort of fit into this category.
Yeah. Powell said the idea of this painting the eyelids with eyes was good enough to make up for the quote, unfortunate fashions of the day. Wide silk lapels, high collars, and even an op art jacket, end quote.
There we go.
All right. Okay. So the next one that we're going to look at is Golden Earring, To the Hilt.
To the Hilt. This is Golden Earring was a Dutch band, I believe.
Right.
With some success.
And, best known for Radar Love.
Yes.
And this idea actually came from one of the core staff members of Hipgnosis, George Hardy. We have a colonial type detective who's always getting into tight pinches, but never loses the stiff upper lip.
That's right.
And apparently he's very resourceful because he survives one incident after the other, only to get into the next one, have a kind of perils of Penelope type thing going on.
Right. And so you have Hipgnosis creating this kind of narrative on the front cover, back cover, inside, right, that may or may not be really connected to the music. I mean, this is one of the things that Hipgnosis did quite often, was that there was something happening on the outside. There was a kind of narrative happening on the outside that made the album, both front and back, even more compelling. And I think you have a classic example here with this golden earring cover. And whether or not, well, it doesn't really connect with the music in any kind of meaningful way, but it's, you know, it's fascinating, it's fun. And my
Kind of
God,
gatefold for this. Do you still have that?
well, I don't, let me take a look. I believe so.
Anyway, I just mentioned George Hardy. It's worth mentioning that there was a core staff. Of course, people would come and go. The demands were incredible on their staff. So there weren't a lot of people who were able to just hang around
Right.
and take that for years and years. But people worth mentioning are like Richard Evans, George Hardy, Richard Manning, um, and of course, Peter Christopherson, who started off as a staff member in '74 and became eventually became a partner of
That's right.
Hipgnosis around '77, I think. Okay, so here we see at least another one of the situations that this poor guy gets into, but his demeanor never changes. He's very
Never
stoic.
changes. Unflappable, indeed.
All right. Next on our list is Hawkwind. Now, Steve, this album has something in common with Animals, the album cover from Animals, and album cover from UFO's Lights Out.
Hmm. Well, Animals is best known for the use of the Battersea Power Station.
Yes. Okay.
So
That's
I'm wondering, and I'm wondering if the Battersea Power Station is somehow a part of this cover.
well, that's incredible. This is Control Room B
There we go.
of the Battersea Power Station, with graphics added by the artist Jeff Halpin. But yes, both for this Hawkwind album and for the Lights Out album by UFO.
Yes. Okay.
They
Right.
they used the Battersea Power album, Power Station, um, at a time when it was being decommissioned. I think
Right.
all three were done in 1977. So
That's
they
that's
basically
right.
discovered it as a wonderful place for photography and just used the shit out of it. So
I think that's absolutely right. You know, the Battersea was an important power station for several decades in the UK. It's just right on the edge of London. It is now it's a protected structure. It's a part of the National Heritage list in the UK. But I think it became a famous place because of the use of the Hipgnosis using it as a backdrop. And they obviously use the interior. It's it's clever. Hipgnosis, they were nothing but if not resourceful, right? They knew, and oftentimes they were operating on, at least in the early days, operating on a pretty small budget, and so they were able to get a lot of mileage out of something like Battersea. And so there you go, Hawkwind.
yeah, absolutely. This cover actually came about through a chance meeting of Powell and Robert Calvert, who was the lead singer and writer of the group, who asked Powell to create the next album cover for them.
Cool. Yeah.
But Hawkwind was kind of a space rock thing, and
That's right.
This apparently wasn't quite science fiction enough for their tastes, so it was the only one that they ended up doing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that was 1977. Next one on our list is Straub's Deadlines.
Right. Straub's were a kind of folk rock act, with quite a following actually in the UK. They were for a time they were really quite popular, and and this particular album cover has quite a story attached to it.
Yeah, this interesting thing about hypnosis is a lot of times they would come up with elaborate backstories for the art, for the photography that they were doing. Um, and here, the idea is, yeah, okay, when you're under a deadline and when you're rushing to try to get something finished under a tight deadline, you kind of have the feeling like you're suffocating or drowning.
Right. Right.
But beyond that, there's even the idea, okay, why is this in the phone booth? Well, maybe there's also you're playing with the idea of like lines, telephone lines, a line that goes dead, and perhaps this special agent, 007 type, is talking to the villain in the telephone booth, and the villain says, "Well, your line is about to go dead, Mr. Bond. As are you."
Yeah. There we go. Cue evil
Interesting.
actor. Right.
Yeah. We've mentioned it before. There was no Photoshop or anything back then. None of that computer stuff to work
Right.
with. They had to do everything by hand, down to constructing a phone booth like this one. This phone booth was constructed in the backyard of Aubrey Powell. They filled it with water. The only thing they forgot was to put a drain in it. So the first time that they tried it, the panes of glass were not strong enough. They broke, showering Powell, who was the photographer of this shoot, with panes of glass.
Oh yeah.
Um, they made the panes stronger. They held the water, and that kept their friend, this guy that was doing the stunt, in so well that he actually nearly drowned. He couldn't get out, and they couldn't get the water out. So he was a good singer, but a good swimmer, but that doesn't really help in a situation like
Jesus
this.
Christ.
And I think that the lesson from all this, the moral of the story is you don't want to be a stunt man for hypnosis.
No.
It doesn't turn out well, or
No.
it
Uh,
always turns out well. I mean, the end is always okay, but there are these near disasters. Steve, you remember what happened with the "Wish You Were Here"?
well, yeah. So they have the "Wish You Were Here" album, that famously has the two businessmen shaking hands, one of them on fire. Again, and so back in the day, you, in order to get that shot, you had to light someone on fire, and they did it several times, and then several times, and on and on, and then eventually, right? Well, the guy almost the guy almost got burnt up, and basically said, "That's it." Walked away. They got the shot, but yeah, hypnosis. There are several stories in the hypnosis canon where there were near huge accidents involving stunt people, because again, you had to do it for real. You couldn't somehow artificially manufacture it with a Photoshop kind of thing. These were people who were putting themselves in jeopardy, and in jeopardy they really were.
Yeah. Okay. So um, there's that. Our next album is a double live album from Todd Rundgren, um, "Back to the Bars."
Right.
Steve, you want to say a little bit
Well, yeah,
about?
this is okay. So this comes out in the mid 1970s, roughly at the same time as Frampton Comes Alive hit stores, the A&M release. And Frampton Comes Alive, of course, becomes this enormous sensation. But the interesting thing about Frampton Comes Alive was that essentially it was a kind of greatest hits album that was recorded live. Well, they tried a similar thing with Rundgren. So Rundgren had songs dating back into the late 1960s. They put together this album, have it recorded live in an attempt to kind of replicate Frampton's success. It doesn't replicate Frampton Comes Alive in any kind of meaningful way, but
No. In fact, it only makes it to number 75 on the Billboard Pop
all right.
Albums chart. That's didn't generate any singles. Um, uh, he played songs live from 7 of his 8 studio albums,
That's right.
and only the 8th one, only the last one, was not represented. And knowing, talking about Frampton, the songs that I knew from Frampton were the songs that I heard from Frampton Comes Alive. I had never been exposed to his music before.
Right. Right.
Um, and he had never had hits like he had from his live album before.
No, that's right. And so the Rundgren, I mean, I think it's an interesting strategy. Rundgren tried a similar kind of thing. For what it's worth, this is one of the first albums I purchased, and this was, in fact, my introduction to Rundgren. This was the first Rundgren album I bought. And again, one of the things that made it noteworthy was it's double LP, but you have this kind of funky cover, which uses some it's Hipgnosis, right? They have photography and then they have image. And Dave, you may want to talk a little bit about this, but you see this quite often with Hipgnosis album covers where you have images then integrated into an actual photographic images.
Right. And again, this is a portrait, right? It's essentially a portrait. But Rundgren said to them, look, if you could somehow represent my virtuosity on the guitar in this picture, if you could somehow bring that to expression. And the graphic in here showing whatever this is, kind of a slinky between the hands. It looks more like someone playing a harmonica.
It does. There's something.
It's definitely something dynamic going on here, showing his power or his craft or whatever. But again, it's essentially a portrait. To their credit, he does not look ugly here, and Todd Rundgren is one of the ugliest men in rock and roll.
First of all, that's just so not true.
Well,
oh, come on.
Anyway, I think that was quite an accomplishment in itself, is to make him look fairly normal.
That's cool.
And not incredibly hideous. Okay, so this
jeez.
Our next one is Hot Chocolate.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Everyone's a Winner. This is the album that had a Sexy Thing on it. Everyone's a Winner. I think the two best hits of his are right here. We see a woman at night talking on the telephone, probably an intimate conversation with her lover. And like so much from Hipgnosis, this is only the surface of the story.
That's right. It's only the surface of the story, right? And so as she thinks that she is in an intimate conversation with her lover, just kind of one-on-one, the back cover reveals a different story. And so this is the back cover of Everyone's a Winner.
He's sitting in the lounge at some hotel with his buddies, having a drink and taking the time out to call his mistress and wish her good night. Of course, they're hearing the entire end of his end of the conversation. So what she thinks is intimate and just cozy and warm is not that at all on his end. Now, there's something about this that reminds us a little bit of the 10cc cover, How Dare You, right?
Absolutely, that's right.
On How Dare You, they had people talking on the telephone. They used the split screen, which was used in Hollywood so often for that situation. Here, the split screen is accomplished with the gatefold, but it's kind of a return to that trope, right?
That's right, exactly.
All right, next we have the Edgar Broughton Band, Parlez-vous English? On this album cover, we see an unwary British tourist couple that's wandered into a French bistro and are going to try to figure out how to order something to eat or maybe to get instructions. The atmosphere is indifferent to hostile. The people around
Mhm.
them are checking them out.
That's right.
The funny thing about this is this looks a little bit like an illustration from a language textbook
Yes, it does.
where you have different things labeled in the language that you want to learn. The difference is that there are at least two different languages, English and French, and some of it's a mix. But it's all ironic, witty. There's a lot of wordplay, which, as we said before, Hipgnosis just loves. It's a fun album to look at.
For sure. Fun album to look at. But again, I think GROUGHTONS then enter again one another group that most people have never heard of, but yet they have this kind of classic album cover that people like us are still talking about long after the group has, faded from view.
All right. Our next album is by the Queen drummer, Roger Taylor. His solo effort from 1981, Fun in Space. And
Yeah.
this is also one of my favorite albums of theirs. Here we have the alien reading adventure comic about aliens, a science fiction magazine. And the gatefold shows the other side of this.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the gatefold. It's again, it's pretty involved, as we'll see. It's pretty involved, but it does, I think, hit upon some sort of classic hypnosis techniques, where they're kind of creating a story on the album itself, kind of having really nothing to do with the music. And in this case, Roger Taylor had made quite a name for himself in Queen and was branching out on his own in the solo LP. So it's actually kind of an adventurous choice on Taylor's part as well to have this type of cover. But there you have it. It's you get the whole story here with the gatefold.
Again, in a way, this can be seen as a portrait cover.
Yes,
but,
I think that's right.
You almost forget the fact that this is a portrait because it's so inventive.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, our next album cover on the list is from Def Leppard from 1981, High and Dry.
Yeah, big album.
Me,
yeah, big album.
Yes, it's a big album for Def Leppard. Arguably, really only based on their music. There are some albums that Hipgnosis album covers helped sell. I think that's not too daring of an assertion, but
that's right.
I don't know. This one doesn't do much for me. All right, we have the idea. This guy is still dry because he's sprung from the high board, but he's not in the water yet. Okay, it's clear he's going to be soaking wet in a matter of seconds, but it's more of a craftsman like production for me rather than one of the really.
I'd agree. Yeah, I'd agree. It's not particularly interesting. There are many Hipgnosis album covers with people diving. There are many Hipgnosis album covers where humans are sort of flipped on their head for a variety of reasons. But again, it shows, I mean, Def Leppard knew what they were doing. They wanted to reach out to Hipgnosis. Hipgnosis was this, this incredible brand, and what could Hipgnosis deliver for them? And in this case, this is what Hipgnosis delivered. And I think the results are kind of middling, but they sold a lot of records, but based, I think, on the music, not the cover, as you noted.
All right. And at this point, we're going to shift gears and we're going to take a look at all of the debut albums that Hipgnosis did covers for. And we're going to go back in time. We just saw Def Leppard from 1981. We're going to switch back to 1970 and then proceed chronologically from there. But the first one that we're going to look at is Quatermass from 1970. Now, the band Quatermass took its name from a 50s BBC science fiction series, The Quatermass Experiment. And Thorgerson and Powell had grown up watching this series. And so when they thought of Quatermass, they thought of black and white television, right? And
Yep.
of somehow science fiction things. So pterodactyls flying in the middle of high-rise buildings is kind of a science fiction idea.
For sure.
Right. Very easily done. They took the pictures at near Victoria Station, and the pterodactyls were cut out of book illustrations and just pasted on.
Yeah.
So in terms of the sophistication, nothing too terribly sophisticated about this, but it was a cheapo thing. And a lot of the stuff they did for the original bands were fairly cheap. These bands didn't have a lot of money to spend.
That's right.
But Powell said, we were able to do a lot of this because we were also working with very big, very successful bands who had the sort of budget
That's absolutely right.
make money on, and that's the way that worked. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is Toe Fat. And by the way, the names of these debut albums are mostly the names of the bands. So
all right, let's look at the,
as we're aware.
So this is
Toe Fat. Also from 1970. The influence was from photographers like Man Ray, Bill Brandt, some surrealism, obviously here, and Toe Fat are people with toe heads. Now,
Yep.
What's interesting about this album, this is worth talking about mostly because the couple, the nude couple, was replaced in the American issue. The Toe Fat album was put out by Rare Earth in America. Steve, can you say anything about Rare Earth?
Yeah, Rare Earth again was an imprint of Motown. It was Motown sort of rock and roll label, and Rare Earth was named after the first group signed Rare Earth. Most, I think, probably notable for their song "I Just Want to Celebrate." But yeah, so in the United States, then the Toe Fat album looked like this.
So the nude album
Yeah.
was the nude couple was replaced by a lamb.
Oh yes, of course.
An interesting choice, and I wondered if this maybe inspired one of their later 10cc albums that had a picture of a sheep on a couch in front of waves that was taken on location in Hawaii, by the way. Just
That's right.
You have to wonder.
Yeah, it seems possible. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Moving on, we have what do we have? Gravy Train, I think.
Gravy Train. Yeah.
Okay. So far, what we've seen are just a number of strange little concepts, and this is another one. A strangely compelling picture. I'm not even sure why, but all the debut albums that we've seen so far are noticeably not portraits, and this one also is not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's strategic because it's harder to sell a group that no one knows, unless they're just have incredible looks. Something about this cover though that is fascinating is that it's quite dense in its own way, and so there's a lot to investigate. So it does, I think, really add to the compelling nature of the image. I agree with you, but
yeah, exactly.
It does.
And if you're sitting there, you're stoned, you've used the gatefold to sift the seeds out of your weed, and you're listening to the album, and it's a very passive activity. What else are you going to do? You're going to look at the album cover, and that's why good album covers are so important. This gives a stoned listener or a non-stoned listener a lot to look at, a lot to observe.
For sure.
So,
Agreed.
moving along, we have Orange Bicycle. Orange Bicycle, also from 1970. In a way, a portrait album.
Yeah, that's right.
Not photographic portrait, but we have the members of the group here drawn in chalk by a street artist. I really like this album cover. I think it's quite clever.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I think it's quite distinctive. It doesn't really remind me much of anything in the Hipgnosis canon. It seems like a very interesting direction for Hipgnosis. And as you said, there's a kind of there's a portrait element to it, a portrait-like quality to it. But fascinating. But I mean, once again, right? Orange Bicycle. Who knows? I mean, that group no one's ever heard of, but yet this album cover has a life of its own.
All right. So that's the closest we've come to a portrait so far, and the next album cover is definitely not a portrait. I'm not entirely sure what it is. Steve, maybe you can give me your impression. This is Birth Control. The album Birth Control by the group Birth Control. Also a debut album, also a one-shot.
What?
This thing kind of looks a little bit like a stretched out condom.
Little bit. And there's
and inside it an eel.
Eel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are we to think of this? I have no idea.
I don't either. Birth Control is not a group that most people will have heard of, but we encourage you to take a look at some of Birth Control's LP covers, which are quite memorable. They were
none of the others of theirs are by Hipgnosis.
That's right. That's exactly right. But they took a lot of chances with their album covers. This, in many ways, is the most modest or whatever.
Or the least offensive or whatever.
Least offensive. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Yeah. But yeah, who knows what this is really? Yeah, it's a.
Well, listeners, if you have any ideas of what this is supposed to
for sure
represent, please write a comment and let us know what you think.
That's right. Because we haven't a clue, to be perfectly candid.
All right, our next one is a debut album. It's not a one-off. ELO actually had 7. Hipgnosis makes 7 of their album covers. So, but this is the first, and that's why we're going to talk about this here.
Yeah, this is okay. So ELO. So this is Electric Light Orchestra. They had been known as the Move for several years, and then Roy Wood, Jeff Lynne, and Beth Bevan break off and create a new group. And at the time, it was considered a kind of super group. But this is the debut album, and it's a little it's a little flat. There's a story with this, I think, but
yeah. The Electric Light Orchestra. Okay. To have an electric light bulb on the cover is a little bit, it's very spot on. But
yeah,
the fact is that Powell had recently bought this light bulb lamp by the German industrialist designer Ingo Maurer for himself. It was a lamp in his home. But when the Electric Light Orchestra came to Hipgnosis and said, we'd like you to do our debut album cover, he thought, well, my lamp is perfect for that. and especially so since the manager of the group, Don Arden, was notoriously loath to spend money
Boy, that's for
on
sure.
record covers or
That's
anything
for sure.
else.
Yes, that's right.
So they were. It turns out that this lamp had cost Powell more than they would earn for shooting the album cover. Uh, this was also was it a gay for anyway the back cover of this showed the members of the band in various period costumes. Um, so
Smoke.
it was
Yeah,
kind of a cheapie.
kind of a
It was
cheapie.
they rented a government function room in Horse Guards Parade in London, empty, nothing going on there, and they just put this thing in and took the picture, and they still um, almost lost money.
That's right. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
On the first ELO album. So, the next album that we're going to look at is from Tear Gas. Tear Gas by Tear Gas, 1971. And again, I'm at a loss to say what this is. I recognize a hand.
Take a look here.
And the hand is holding and possibly manipulating something, but what?
It's,
Steve, any ideas?
I don't know. And I've looked at this a number of times. I'm just not really quite sure what's happening there. Again, if those of you watching this have an idea, feel free to put it into the comments. We're just really not quite sure. It is, it's kind of a strangely compelling image. Once again, it's another group we've never heard of, but yeah, it's
right.
There's something happening here, but we're just not quite sure what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, no portrait, but that's going to end with our next artist. The next person we're going to look at is it's not. I'm sorry, John James is someone who specifically did not want a portrait cover. So they went back to Dungeness, where they did the Picnic Breath of Fresh Air album, the beach near the atomic power plant.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
And
This is
they took the photograph. I'm not sure, but I believe the boat has been superimposed on the photograph of the boy on the beach.
I think so too. Yeah.
But again, we see the use of black and white photography that's hand tinted.
Yeah.
Okay. Stackridge is next. This is essentially a painted image. And I'm not sure what we're looking at here exactly. Seagulls, some type of birds. What's interesting about this album is that one of the songs on it is Dora, the female explorer.
Yes. Well, okay.
Those are seagulls, right? Seagulls
there's seagulls
in the background, sure.
Yeah, it's the most memorable thing about Stackridge. Again, it is amazing that they one after the next, right, of these groups getting a start, and they kind of fade from view, but yet these album covers then hold our attention decades later.
And viewers, if any of you are big Stackridge or Gravy Train fans,
for sure, yeah.
We apologize, but you have to admit they're not well known.
So yeah, not household names.
Discovered a rare gem, and good for you.
It's quite possible.
And we certainly don't want to disparage the quality of any of the music since we're not familiar with it. But yeah, these are not bands that went on to make it big. Okay, our next one, Matthew Ellis. Now we're back to portraits. And this is, again, it's not just a straight up simple portrait, but it's not far from being a straight up simple portrait, right? So.
That's right. there's a lot here to try to take in, but I mean, in a way, it does. It's a very conventional cover, which actually, that's the exception that kind of proves the rule when it comes to hypnosis. So you could imagine this kind of cover coming from another kind of artist collective or another album cover company.
But at least this is not Matthew Ellis. It actually has a title. Am I?
Am I? Yeah, he poses the question. Yeah.
Yes. Moving right along. The next one is Master's Apprentices from 1971. Another group I've never heard of, but the album is not completely uninteresting. The album cover,
Right.
but we have the chair with someone invisible down to the hand.
Mostly invisible. Yep.
And even this has a portrait element on the back cover.
Right.
The hand is holding a photograph of the band instead of a cigarette.
So you could
they sneak a portrait in there.
They sneak a portrait in. So you could imagine a record company balking at the cover concept and then Hipgnosis coming back. Well, hey, listen, we'll introduce a photograph, but only on Hipgnosis's terms. And so here you have it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The next one is more, well, you don't get much more straight up portrait than the Rory Gallagher debut album cover from 1971 also.
Yeah.
And about the same time, they did Olivia. For Olivia Newton-John, also a straight-up portrait.
Right.
And I think, arguably, Olivia Newton-John is at least marginally more attractive than Rory Gallagher. But this is a very nice picture.
Yeah, I mean it's very but very conventional. Right.
Yeah, very conventional. All right. Our next one is from Flash. Again, this is the debut album, but this is not a one-off. Flash actually had Hipgnosis do 4 of their album covers. This is from 1972. And again, sometimes Hipgnosis's love of wordplay or puns is very unsubtle, very obvious.
Yes. Yeah.
And here we catch a flash of a panty when the dress gets blown up.
That's right. Yeah.
It's a gatefold. So you fold it out, and you can see the entire butt. So
yeah.
So there's that. And this is not that unusual for him.
No, it's not.
They were certainly not above going there and just doing a fairly straight up cheesecake type of
That's
thing.
right.
And we'll talk more about that next time. We have a selection of albums that border good taste, hard on the border, and we'll discuss those at that time.
That's right.
The next album that we're looking at is Fumble from 1972. Now, here we have a young couple, a young man and his girlfriend, and clearly he's trying to slide into second base here and kind of fumbling around. Again, we can't quite get away with wordplay from the wordplay with Hipgnosis.
That's right.
It's going to happen. The original concept was that this was going to be going on at a crowded party. And so when they delivered this cover, also a gatefold, the entire living room was there. And these two were sitting alone on a couch and there was no one else around the manager of the group said, what happened to the party? Where are all the people? And Powell had to tell him, you just couldn't afford it.
Couldn't afford it.
It was,
That's right.
wasn't in the budget. So this is what they got.
Yeah.
All right, the next one, back to portrait. This is Jordan by Earl Jordan, and again, they went to some effort to at least make this a non-standard portrait.
Non-standard indeed. It's
So we got the multiple images.
yeah.
Steve.
Well, you get the multiple images, but that's not the get the ball bearing in his mouth. So that's hard to ignore, which I guess is part of the point. But it is for a kind of standard cover, with portrait. Hipgnosis manages to, do what Hipgnosis does, and they create something much more distinctive, much more memorable. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Next album, Graham Bell. And this is not the inventor of the telephone, but rock and roll artist from 1972. Again,
This
a
is
portrait, but also non-standard, kind of grainy photography, and of course, very, very colorful with contrasting colors.
yeah, it's right. It's for me, it's one of my favorite Hipgnosis covers. There's really a simplicity here that's just quite striking, but there's also a kind of energy,
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
kind of. Yeah, I think it's awesome. I just think it's awesome. I just really think that there's something about this that conveys something quite powerful. And so
Okay.
sometimes less is more. And I think this is great. This is one of my favorites for sure.
Well, I'm definitely on board with this being less. And so if less is more, yeah, fantastic. Next, we have String Driven Thing. Now, again, this is the debut, but this is not a one-off. String Driven Thing actually had 4 Hipgnosis covers, and here we see the gatefold. Kind of a crazy party, the sort of thing that I imagine was being described in Mama Told Me Not to Come.
Yeah.
On the front cover, we have the central figure smoking a cigar, and the smoke has kind of covered his eyes like a balcony or perhaps types of glasses. In front of him, it's a huge platter of spaghetti. And we see on the back cover, the waiter is coming with more. And there's all sorts of other things going on here as well. We have a dwarf sailor playing accordion, and so on and so forth. Because they didn't have a lot of money to spend on models, they recruited friends of theirs from the theater. Notable is that one of the young ladies, approximately the center of the back cover.
Yeah, she has the white face.
Yes.
Make it.
Is
Helen
Mirren.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's
there we go.
Again, like you said, they didn't have a lot of money, but they did have a lot of friends. And I think people wanted to get in on the action. And so there you go. And so it ends up being, this is, again, one of those, there's a lot in the cover. There's a lot to look at, a lot to take in. It's very, very busy. But again, a little bit on the nose, string driven, right? String driven things. It's these gigantic plates of spaghetti pile up in front. But yeah, Hipgnosis is doing lots of things with lots of artists. There's no question about that.
All right. Next one, debut from Peter Banks. Now, this is not Peter Banks, but this is Two Sides of Peter Banks is the title.
Yeah, this is really
and actually
compelling.
A fairly clever portrait.
So too.
cover. So we actually have the double portrait and kind of two sides of Peter Banks, like there are two sides of any one of us. The straight, buttoned up, tie wearing banker type, and the hipster, disco kind of guy, right? So
That's right. That's right.
all right. Next, we have Uno from 1974.
And Uno from 74, quite colorful. A lot here.
Yes, indeed. This is one version of this album. The other one shows kind of a jester out in the fields with a cloak
Oh,
in checked kind of a checker pattern with part of the checker pattern being negative space that is
Let-
see-through all the way to the
let
field.
me, yes. So there we go. So let me retrieve that one. I think I do have that.
Although I really like the one you showed too, but I'm not entirely sure that that Hipgnosis had anything to do with that one. They will use the same technique that they used here later on, and we'll talk about that album next week as well. But this is the first time that they've used this idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I'm not able to. Yeah, so I'm familiar with the one you're talking about. We'll have to show that next week. I don't have that with me here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll show that next time when we talk about the other album. And the next one we're going to be looking at today is Headstone from 1975. Now, this is a fairly straightforward, fairly simplistic album. We simply have a really nice graphic, interesting. There's not a whole lot more to say about it.
No, it's just it's reminiscent. Those of those of you who are Journey fans, this is a Journey-esque kind of approach. But the logo, it's like a pretty simple ink drawing. It's fascinating. Again, I just think sometimes a little less is more, and I just think there's something here that really is it's really compelling.
Yeah, and although it's fairly
Energy.
simplistic, there's also quite a bit to look at.
Yep.
So,
Agreed. Yeah.
So there's that. Beyond that, we have the Wing Keys, and this is a bit of a departure for Hipgnosis, because whereas they are certainly big fans, or at least big exploiters of cheesecake, this is one of the few beefcake
Yeah.
album covers that
That's
they
right.
put out. Again, very simple, very basic. The Wing Keys, 1970.
Yeah, I mean, but in its own way, I mean, there's a certain kind of boldness to it, a certain kind of brazenness to it that's unusual. And once again, I mean, the Winkies, who knows? The Winkies, I think they disappeared without a trace largely, but this album cover, there's something there that's worth talking about. Good.
Okay. Then we have Sammy Hagar, the Red Rocker.
Yes.
Right. So
that's right.
Playing on that, Powell knew of a place nearby in a nearby town where there was a lot of red brick buildings, a very red corner. It wasn't really quite enough for Hagar. He wasn't impressed, but they added some people dressed in red, and they added the red car.
Right.
And in the end, it was actually a fairly compelling red cover. Um, it was a one shot because, oh no, I'm sorry, this wasn't even a one shot. Hagar had them do another cover, but
Yeah,
when this LP was re-released, it had a different cover.
yeah, Hagar didn't care for it at all, even after the augmentation. Yeah, Hagar was entering his solo career. He had spent time in Montrose, and Montrose, we'll talk about this in an upcoming episode. Montrose used Hipgnosis quite famously, or quite infamously, with an album cover called Jump on It. But yeah, Hagar, yeah, he wasn't happy with this at all, and it sort of disappeared upon re-release. But the Red Rocker, and
Yeah,
all,
I really don't understand that. I mean, yeah. Anyway, I
yeah,
think it's
that's it.
a good translation of the nickname, right?
Nickname, yeah, I'd agree.
All right, our next one comes from an artist known as Thrillington.
Yeah,
So
this is kind of curious.
There was who was the artist behind Thrillington, Steve?
Well, it's Paul
I mean,
McCartney.
Yeah, this
It's
was
Paul McCartney. Yeah,
something that
this is
was a
it's
lot of people suspected for a long time, but it
yeah,
hasn't
that's right.
really been confirmed. Yeah.
So McCartney, in the early '70s, along with his wife Linda, recorded an album called Ram, quite well received. And what Ram is, what Thrillington is the orchestral version of the songs on Ram, and so you get the sense of that here with the Ram playing the violin. McCartney didn't formally acknowledge his connection to this album for years, and so there was a lot of mystery surrounding Thrillington. Who was Thrillington? What was this album all about? But actually, the album itself was well received and is actually thought of pretty highly, and is a kind of cult classic, and certainly McCartney fans have a copy of it. This is the only time that McCartney did this. He never went down this road again in terms of making orchestral recordings of his particular songs or an album replicating it. But that's what Thrillington was all about. And so it's an odd album. It's a kind of curious cover, but there you go. A kind of interesting one-off for sure.
Yeah, this came out in '77.
Yeah.
But it had been planned for it to immediately follow.
That's right.
Ram.
Yes. Yeah, I think
And
there's like
I
a
think it was
4-year gap or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was even recorded immediately after Gap, but it
That's
took
right. Yeah.
4 years until it was actually till it actually came out. And we've talked about this before. McCartney really liked Hipgnosis and did a lot of work with them, specifically with Paul McCartney and Wings.
Sure.
Okay, our next one is from the Dukes, 1979. And this is also a kind of a subversive portrait
Yes.
cover.
That's right.
Because the newspaper shows the band in its photograph, but this is actually kind of a film noir type of cover. In fact, the eyes and the hat really looks a lot like the Shadow. So
it does. It does. Yeah.
it's I think that's no accident. And
No accident. Yeah.
It's an interesting cover.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Last one we're going to look at today is Ginger. And Ginger was from 1980. And this will kind of be a segue to next week too, because clearly this was meant to be titillating. People getting undressed. Of course, they couldn't resist turning the blonde hair, hand tinting it to be red hair, ginger.
Of course. Yeah.
And so that's the last of these.
Yeah,
But they did a ton of this work. They did like nearly 250 album covers.
that's right.
And,
Yeah.
as we saw, a lot of them were one-offs with debut albums.
Yeah, but sex sells, as we see with the last album cover with Ginger, and as we'll see then next time when we look at some of the edgier choices that Hipgnosis made, and some of them are quite quite outlandish in a way. But that's for next time. So Dave, some thoughts for our viewers as we wind this episode down.
Sure. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Steve and Dave's Rock Art. You can subscribe to our channel here. You can see other rock art episodes, the first Hipgnosis episodes right here. Or you can check out our playlist, which I highly recommend right here.
There we go. And also a reminder to check us out on Twitter, Stephen Daves 1. That's Stephen Daves 1 on Twitter. And thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See you then. Bye-bye.